A poor black girl was rushing to school, trying to make it on time, when she suddenly spotted a woman kneeling on the sidewalk. It was clear from her pregnant belly and exhausted expression that she was struggling. Without hesitation, the girl ran over to help, steadying her and making sure she was okay. Moments later, a man in an expensive suit came running, quickly taking the woman to the hospital. To the girl, it was just a simple act of kindness, but what she didn't know was that she had just saved the life of a billionaire's wife. Nia Carter woke up to the sharp, persistent buzz of her old alarm clock, its cracked plastic casing rattling slightly with each shrill ring. She groaned, rubbing her tired eyes, and forced herself to sit up in bed. The dim morning light filtered through the tattered blinds, casting faint lines across the small, cluttered room. Her thin blanket was tangled around her legs, a meager barrier against the cold draft slipping in through the cracked window. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and the faint remnants of last night's dinner, if a single piece of toast could even be called that. She turned her head and immediately spotted the eviction notice, still sitting on the kitchen table, its bold red letters glaring at her like an unspoken threat. The sight made her stomach clench, a familiar wave of anxiety creeping in. 3 days. That's all they had left before they would be forced out. She wished she could crumple it up and pretend it wasn't real, but that wouldn't change anything. The rent was overdue, just like last month, and her mother's paycheck wasn't enough to cover both food and a roof over their heads. The apartment was silent except for the occasional distant honk of a car on the main road. Her mother, Lorraine Carter, had already left for work hours ago, an early shift at the diner, where she worked endless hours on her feet, carrying plates and forced smiles while barely making enough to keep them afloat. Nia sighed, swallowing down the lump in her throat. She knew her mother was doing everything she could, but it never seemed to be enough. No matter how hard they tried, life kept pulling them down like quicksand. Sliding out of bed, Nia walked barefoot across the cold wooden floor to the tiny kitchenette, where she reached for the only thing left to eat, a stale piece of bread from the night before. She chewed slowly, her jaw tight, forcing herself to get something in her stomach before heading out. Hunger had long since become an old companion, something she had learned to push aside. She quickly threw on her cleanest shirt, though it was still slightly wrinkled, and pulled her backpack over one shoulder. The worn-out fabric sagged under the weight of her schoolbooks she had borrowed from the public library because she couldn't afford new ones. She glanced at the clock. If she didn't leave now, she'd be late for school. Stepping outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying the distant scent of car exhaust and the faint saltiness of the nearby bay. Hollow Creek, the part of Riverside she lived in, was a place that most people tried to forget. The buildings were old and crumbling, their paint peeling in layers like the stories of the people who lived inside. Stray dogs barked from behind broken fences, and down the street, a few early risers were already gathering near the corner store, huddling in small groups, murmuring about whatever gossip had spread overnight. Nia walked quickly, her steps brisk and practiced. She knew how to move without drawing attention, how to keep her head down, how to avoid the wrong kind of stares. She had learned long ago that walking too slowly made her a target, and walking too fast made her look like she was running from something. As she reached the edge of downtown Riverside, the scenery changed drastically. Here the sidewalks were clean, the buildings tall and shining, and the people well-dressed and hurried, moving with a sense of purpose that was completely foreign to her world. The contrast was stark, it always was. She had walked this route every morning for as long as she could remember, cutting through this wealthier part of town on her way to school. She had long since stopped feeling the pang of envy. Instead, she felt invisible. Her gaze flickered up to the Reynolds Enterprises Tower, a sleek structure of glass and steel that loomed over the rest of the city like a silent giant. The entrance was buzzing with movement businessmen in pressed suits, women in tailored dresses, all too absorbed in their own lives to notice a teenage girl in second-hand clothes passing by. Nia kept her head down, her fingers tightening slightly on the strap of her backpack. She was used to this feeling, being out of place, being reminded that she didn't belong. The weight of it was always there, lingering like a shadow she couldn't shake. But she wasn't here to dwell on what she didn't have. She just needed to get through another day. Then, just she was about to cross the street, something caught her eye. A woman pregnant standing near the entrance of the Reynolds building. Something about her posture made Nia's stomach drop. The woman was wobbling slightly, one hand pressed firmly to her belly, her breathing quick and uneven. Her face was flushed, her other hand gripping the metal railing beside her like she was trying to keep herself upright. For a moment, Nia froze. She glanced around, expecting someone else to notice, someone else to step in. There were plenty of people around, businessmen, security guards, passers-by, but no one stopped. A few stole quick glances before looking away, as if helping a struggling stranger wasn't their concern. A familiar voice echoed in Nia's mind, her mother's warning, "Stay out of trouble, Nia. People like us don't get second chances in places like that." She knew she should keep walking. She had nothing to do with this. Getting involved could only bring trouble. But then the woman's legs buckled. Without thinking, Nia ran forward. Nia's feet barely touched the ground as she lunged forward, arms reaching just in time to catch the pregnant woman before she collapsed onto the unforgiving concrete. The woman was heavier than Nia expected, her weight pressing down, but Nia held firm, tightening her grip to keep her steady. The woman let out a shaky breath, her body trembling, and Nia could feel the rapid rise and fall of her chest, her breathing uneven and strained. "It's okay, I got you," Nia said quickly, adjusting her stance to support more of the woman's weight. "Just breathe. You're not alone." The woman's skin was clammy, a thin sheen of sweat forming across her forehead. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, as she clutched her belly with one hand and gripped Nia's arm with the other. She was in trouble. Nia's heart pounded. She looked around, expecting anyone to rush forward and help. But no one did. Businessmen in tailored suits walked past, sparing only glances of curiosity before moving along. A woman in a crisp beige dress paused, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the phone in her hand, before shaking her head and walking away. A few bystanders whispered amongst themselves, but they kept their distance, their eyes filled with hesitation instead of concern. Anger twisted in Nia's chest. How could they just walk away? "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Nia tried again, keeping her voice steady. "You're going to be okay, I promise. Just stay with me." The woman's head lolled slightly, her lips parting as she tried to say something, but her voice was barely a whisper. Nia clenched her jaw, shifting to adjust her grip. If the woman lost consciousness here on the street, she might not wake up. "Hey, we need help," Nia shouted toward the small crowd gathering at a distance, frustration bubbling into her voice. A few people looked away, avoiding her gaze. Others just stood there, staring like this was some kind of live show, waiting for whatever spectacle would unfold. "Unbelievable," Nia muttered under her breath. She didn't have time to wait for someone to grow a conscience. She thought fast. The woman was breathing too hard, her body shuddering, her nails digging into Nia's arm as another sharp wave of pain racked through her. Dehydration? Low blood sugar? Early labor? Nia didn't know. But she knew she needed to act fast. Okay, just stay with me," she murmured, slinging her backpack off one shoulder and yanking it open with one hand. Her fingers scrambled past worn notebooks and broken pencils until they found the bottle of water she had packed that morning. It wasn't much, but it was something. She twisted the cap off with her teeth, then tilted the bottle toward the woman's lips. "Here, sip this," she said, gently guiding the rim to her mouth. At first, the woman barely responded, her breathing too ragged, but then she swallowed weakly, her lips chapped and dry. Nia let her take a few small sips, then pulled the bottle back, watching her carefully. Her color still wasn't great, her face pale, but her eyelids fluttered, and she let out a slow breath. "Good. That's good," Nia said, relief washing over her. She dug deeper into her backpack, pulling out an old granola bar she had been saving for later. "I don't know if you can eat, but if it's your blood sugar," the woman gave a faint shake of her head. "Cramps," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "Something's wrong." A cold bolt of fear shot through Nia's chest. This wasn't just exhaustion. It wasn't just dehydration. Something was wrong. The woman let out a strangled gasp, her grip tightening on Nia's arm. Her entire body shook, a wave of pain overtaking her, and this time when she spoke, her voice was thick with terror. "My baby." Nia snapped into action. "Okay, we're calling an ambulance right now." She reached for her pocket, only to curse under her breath when she realized her phone was still at home, the screen cracked beyond repair weeks ago. She lifted her head, whipping her gaze toward the crowd. "Somebody call 911. Now," she shouted, her voice cutting through the buzz of the city. A few people shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Nia's blood boiled. "You're just going to stand there and watch," she snapped, her frustration boiling over into fury. "This is a pregnant woman. She needs a hospital." Finally, a middle-aged woman pulled out her phone and pressed it to her ear, mumbling something about emergency services. Nia turned back to the pregnant woman, her mind racing. The woman was curling in on herself, gripping her stomach, her breathing uneven. "We need to get you off the ground," Nia said quickly. She looped an arm around her shoulders, doing her best to lift her into a better sitting position. The woman was trembling, her nails biting into Nia's wrist, but she nodded weakly, trusting Nia to keep her steady. Nia glanced toward the entrance of the Reynolds Enterprises building, her heart thudding when she saw a security guard approaching fast, his eyes locked onto her. She knew that look. It was the same look she had seen 100 times before on store clerks who followed her around aisles, on bus drivers who narrowed their eyes when she counted out crumpled dollar bills for a fare, on landlords who talked down to her mother like they weren't even human. She wasn't the hero in his eyes. She was the problem. His hand hovered near the radio clipped to his belt, his jaw set tight. "Hey," he barked. "Step away from her." Nia braced herself. The woman beside her whimpered in pain, fingers clutching at Nia's sleeve, but the security guard wasn't looking at her. His focus was on Nia. She forced herself to stand her ground. "I'm helping her," she said, her voice sharp but not hostile. The guard didn't look convinced. "I said step back." "She needs a hospital," Nia snapped. "What part of that aren't you getting?" The guard hesitated for half a second, his gaze flickering toward the woman who was clearly struggling to even breathe before returning to Nia, with doubt still heavy in his expression. Nia knew what he was thinking. What was a girl like her doing with a woman like this? The answer was clear in his narrowed eyes. It didn't matter that Nia was the only one who had stopped to help. It didn't matter that the woman was holding on to her like a lifeline. It didn't matter that Nia had done nothing but try to save her. She had already been judged. Nia gritted her teeth, anger burning in her stomach. She wasn't about to back down. And then, before the guard could reach for his radio, "Let her go." A voice cut through the tension like a knife. A deep, commanding voice. The guard froze. Nia turned her head and saw him, Ethan Reynolds. Standing at the top of the steps, a towering presence in a tailored suit, his expression a storm of authority and concern. Everything shifted in an instant. The murmurs in the crowd died down. The security guard took a step back, and for the first time since Nia had rushed forward, she realized things were about to change. The weight of the moment pressed down on Nia like an invisible force. The entire world seemed to narrow to the man standing at the top of the stairs, Ethan Reynolds, the name behind every towering glass building in downtown Riverside, the face that graced magazine covers about business empires and wealth beyond imagination. His sharp, calculating eyes swept over the scene, taking in every detail. In an instant, the trembling woman clinging to Nia's sleeve, the way Nia stood firm despite the security guard towering over her, the hesitant crowd that had gathered yet done nothing, and finally, the way the guard himself seemed caught between authority and uncertainty. "I said let her go." His words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that stopped everything cold. The security guard hesitated for only a moment before releasing Nia's arm, his fingers twitching slightly, as if he had just realized his mistake. He stepped back, his posture stiff, his eyes darting between Ethan and Nia, searching for some kind of explanation, but none came. Nia inhaled sharply, shaking off the lingering grip on her wrist, her pulse still hammering in her ears. For the first time since she had rushed forward to help, she felt the full intensity of the situation settle onto her shoulders. She had nearly been dragged away for trying to save a life. And if Ethan Reynolds hadn't stepped in, she wasn't sure how it would have ended. Sophia Reynolds let out a low, pained moan, pulling Nia's attention back in an instant. Nia tightened her grip on the woman's arm, refocusing. "She's in trouble," Nia said quickly, glancing up at Ethan. "She needs to get to a hospital now. She's been cramping. She almost passed out, she." "An ambulance is already on the way," a voice called from the side. One of Ethan's employees, a tall man in a pressed gray suit, had his phone pressed to his ear. ETA 3 minutes. 3 minutes is too long, Nia snapped, frustration crackling in her voice. She's barely staying conscious. We need to. Nia. The sound of her own name caught her off guard. It was the way Ethan said it, as if testing it, grounding it. When she looked up, his expression had shifted, no longer just authoritative, but something else. Measured, serious, intent. She suddenly felt exposed under his gaze, like she had been dragged into a conversation she wasn't prepared for. You did this, he said. The words startled her. What? She said, blinking. You stepped in when no one else did, Ethan continued, glancing briefly at the useless onlookers before returning his gaze to her. You saved my wife. Something tightened in Nia's throat. It hadn't felt like saving. It had felt like fighting against a tide that was determined to pull her under. She dropped her gaze, shaking her head. I couldn't just leave her there. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze still pinned on her. You could have, and yet you didn't. Nia swallowed hard, uncomfortable with the attention, the way he was studying her like she was some kind of anomaly. She wasn't. She was just a girl who did what any decent person should have done. Sophia let out another pained gasp, her fingers clutching Ethan's sleeve this time. His expression instantly softened, his focus shifting as he knelt beside her. I'm here, he said quietly, his tone completely different now, gentle, steady, calming. He placed a hand on hers, rubbing slow circles over her knuckles. Breathe, baby. We're getting you to the hospital. Nia took a small step back, suddenly feeling like she was intruding on something deeply personal. The sight of them, this powerful man, now stripped of all corporate dominance, completely undone by the fear of losing someone he loved, made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. The ambulance sirens cut through the tension, red and blue lights flashing against the glass of the Reynolds building. Within seconds, paramedics rushed forward, moving with precision and urgency. Mom, can you hear me? One of them asked, immediately checking Sophia's vitals. She's been having cramps. Nia jumped in, instinctively shifting closer again, her mind already recalling everything she had observed. She was dehydrated, her breathing was labored before she collapsed, and she almost lost consciousness twice. The paramedic nodded sharply, clearly surprised by her detailed response, but wasting no time as he relayed the information to his partner. Possible early labor or placental abruption, he murmured. We need to stabilize her en route. Ethan's jaw tensed at the word abruption, fear flashing in his eyes. We need to go now, another paramedic said, already positioning the stretcher. Ethan immediately stood, gripping Sophia's hand as they lifted her. I'm going with her. You can follow behind in your car, sir, but we need space in the ambulance, one of the paramedics said professionally. Ethan clearly didn't like that answer, but he also knew he had no choice. He turned toward his assistant, barking an order. Tell the hospital I want our personal doctor waiting when she arrives, and get them to clear a private room. The assistant nodded briskly, already pulling out his phone. As they started wheeling Sophia toward the ambulance, her weak gaze turned back to Nia. Wait, she breathed. Her. Ethan immediately turned, following his wife's line of sight until his gaze landed on Nia again. His eyes darkened slightly with something unreadable. Sophia's lips parted as if she wanted to say more, but another sharp pain shot through her, and she barely managed to squeeze Nia's hand before the ambulance doors closed between them. Then, just like that, they were gone. The street felt too quiet in the aftermath, despite the faint murmur of people still lingering in the background. Nia stood there, suddenly aware of how fast her own heart was beating, how exhausted her body felt. Her wrist still tingled where Sophia had grabbed it, the warmth of her touch still lingering. She realized she had just met these people minutes ago, and yet somehow she had been pulled into one of the most intimate moments of their lives. It felt surreal. And then Ethan spoke again. Tell me your name. Nia blinked, caught off guard for the second time that day. She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin slightly. Nia Carter. Ethan nodded once, filing it away. Then, without missing a beat, he pulled a sleek black card from his pocket and held it out to her. Come to my office tomorrow, he said. Nia stared at the card like it was some kind of trick. What? You saved my wife. You saved my child. Ethan's voice was measured. But there was something undeniable beneath it, something firm, something resolute. "Now, let me help you." Nia's fingers tightened into fists at her sides, her thoughts spinning. She didn't need help. She had spent her entire life fighting for things on her own. And yet, the eviction notice on the kitchen table flashed through her mind. Her mother's tired eyes. The weight of knowing they could be forced out of the only home they had ever known. She clenched her jaw, then slowly reached out and took the card. The edges felt smooth beneath her fingertips, the gold-embossed letters too polished, too clean, too different from anything she had ever held before. Ethan studied her for a moment longer, then simply nodded. "I'll see you tomorrow, Nia." Then he turned, already striding toward his car, leaving Nia standing there, her world suddenly changed in ways she didn't understand yet. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like something was about to shift. Nia stared at the business card in her hand long after Ethan Reynolds had disappeared into his sleek black car, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a lead blanket. The thick cardstock felt out of place against her rough fingertips, its gold-embossed lettering catching the fading afternoon light. James Ethan Reynolds, CEO, Reynolds Enterprises. The name carried power, significance, and a world that had never been meant for someone like her. The murmurs of the dispersing crowd drifted away as people lost interest, returning to their schedules, their business meetings, their lunch breaks as if none of this had ever happened. Even the security guard, the one who had grabbed her like a criminal, had quietly slipped back toward the entrance of the building, his presence fading into the background. Nia finally exhaled, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. The tension that had coiled in her chest, like a snake, began to unravel, but it left something else in its place, a gnawing unease. What had just happened? She looked down at the card again. Tomorrow. She was supposed to go to his office tomorrow. The reality of that hit her like a punch to the stomach. What was she even supposed to say when she got there? What did Ethan Reynolds, a man with more money than she could comprehend, want from her? He had said he wanted to help, but rich people never just helped people like her. There was always a catch. And yet, despite every warning bell going off in her head, she couldn't bring herself to toss the card away. Instead, she carefully tucked it into the back pocket of her jeans, clenching her fingers around the fabric as if to make sure it was real. The sun had started dipping lower in the sky, the streets of downtown Riverside glowing in golden light. But Nia didn't stop to take it in. She turned on her heel and walked away, her steps quicker than usual, the weight of everything that had happened pressing into her bones. She reached Hollow Creek just as the streetlights flickered on, the familiar scent of fried food from the corner bodega mixing with the sharp, metallic tang of rusted fire escapes and damp pavement. The buildings here weren't sleek towers of glass like in downtown Riverside. They were worn down, patched up, and barely standing, their bricks cracked from years of neglect. Her apartment was on the third floor of a building that smelled faintly of mildew and forgotten promises. She climbed the narrow stairs 2 at a time, her backpack heavy against her shoulders, her thoughts even heavier. The second she stepped inside, she heard the sound of clanking dishes in the kitchen, followed by the soft hum of her mother's voice, a tune she barely recognized but one that made something in her chest tighten. Her mother, Lorraine Carter, stood at the tiny stove, stirring a pot of something that smelled like canned soup and spices she had probably stretched beyond their expiration date. The lines around her eyes were deeper than they had been a year ago, her dark curls pulled into a loose bun that she hadn't had time to properly fix. She turned when she heard Nia enter, her tired face immediately softening with warmth. "Hey, baby," she greeted, wiping her hands on a dish rag. "You're home late. Everything okay?" Nia hesitated. She could feel the business card in her pocket, burning against her skin like a secret too big to hold on to. "Yeah," she said, forcing her voice to stay even. Something happened. Her mother frowned, setting the spoon down and giving her that look, the one that meant she could tell when something was off. What kind of something? Nia exhaled, knowing she couldn't avoid it. She pulled the card out of her pocket and placed it on the table. Lorraine wiped her hands again before picking it up, her brows knitting together as she read the name. Then she went completely still. When she looked back up at Nia, her eyes were unreadable, a mix of caution, confusion, and something else, something deeper, like worry. "Nia," she said slowly, her voice quieter now. "Why do you have this?" And so, Nia told her everything. She told her about the woman outside the Reynolds building, about the way she had almost collapsed, about how Nia had been the only one to help. She told her about the security guard who had grabbed her, the way people had stared at her like she didn't belong, like she was a problem instead of a person. She told her about Ethan Reynolds stepping in, stopping everything, about how he had looked at her, studied her, asked for her name. And finally, she told her about his offer, about how he wanted to help, about how he had given her this card, this invitation to his world, as if she had any business stepping into it. When she finished, silence settled between them, thick and heavy. Her mother sat down, pressing her fingers against her temples. "Baby," she started, then stopped, as if she didn't know how to say whatever she was thinking. "What?" Nia asked, bracing herself. Lorraine looked up at her, her expression filled with something painfully familiar, that mix of love and fear, of wanting to protect her but knowing she couldn't shield her from everything. This sounds, she hesitated, too good to be true. Nia knew that. She knew it deep in her bones. But the other option was doing nothing, letting the eviction notice on the counter dictate their future, letting their immigration status hang over their heads like a storm cloud waiting to break, letting her mother keep working herself into the ground while Nia watched, helpless, as the world refused to give them a single break. "I know," Nia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Mom, what if it isn't?" Her mother studied her, searching her face for something, maybe for doubt, maybe for a sign that Nia wasn't thinking straight. But all Nia could do was hold her ground, because for the first time in a long time, she had something that looked like a chance. Finally, after what felt like forever, Lorraine exhaled, pressing the card back onto the table. "We go together," she said. "Tomorrow. You don't do this alone." Nia nodded, gripping the edge of the chair to keep her hands from shaking. She wasn't sure if she had just made the best decision of her life, or the worst. Either way, it was happening. And there was no turning back. The next morning, Nia woke up before her alarm. The familiar hum of the city filtered through the thin walls of their apartment car horns. Distant chatter, the occasional siren wailing through the streets. But underneath all of that, there was something else. A feeling she wasn't used to. Something like hope, but not quite. Hope was too fragile, too easily shattered. No, this was something heavier, something real. She rolled onto her side, staring at the ceiling, her mind already racing ahead to what the day would bring. Meeting Ethan Reynolds. Sitting in an office that wasn't meant for people like her. Asking for something she never thought she had the right to ask for. She glanced over at the small kitchen table, where the business card still sat, exactly where her mother had left it the night before. Even from here, Nia could see the way the edges gleamed in the dim light, standing out against the scratched wooden surface. It didn't belong in their apartment, and neither did this opportunity. Her mother was already awake, standing by the tiny sink, pouring exactly 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for Nia. She wasn't dressed for the diner today. Instead, she wore the only blouse she owned that didn't have a frayed collar, paired with a skirt that had been ironed so many times it was starting to wear thin. Nia pushed herself up, running a hand over her face before getting out of bed. "Morning, sweetheart," her mother said, sliding one of the cups toward her as Nia pulled out a chair. Nia mumbled a tired greeting, wrapping her hands around the warmth of the cup, even though she wasn't much of a coffee drinker. She just needed something to hold on to. Lorraine sat down across from her, studying her the way only mothers could. "You ready for this?" Nia wasn't sure how to answer. Was she ready to sit across from a man who could decide her mother's future with a single phone call? Was she ready to stand in a place where she had never belonged and pretend she deserved to be there? "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm going." Her mother nodded once, as if that was all that mattered. They finished their coffee in silence, the weight of the day pressing down on both of them. The Reynolds Enterprises building looked even bigger in the morning light, more intimidating, more untouchable. Nia and her mother stood outside for a long moment, the rush of people moving past them like a current they weren't part of. Businessmen checked their watches. Women in sharp heels clicked across the pavement. Security guards nodded at familiar faces. No one looked at them. No one expected them to be here. Nia adjusted the strap of her backpack, feeling her mother's fingers graze her shoulder in a silent gesture of reassurance. "Let's go," Lorraine said softly. They stepped inside, The lobby was a world of its own, marble floors that gleamed under recessed lighting, walls made of polished wood and glass. The air smelled expensive. People moved with purpose, like they had somewhere important to be, something important to do. Nia fought the urge to tug at the hem of her shirt, suddenly hyper-aware of how out of place she must look. A woman at the front desk barely glanced at them at first, but the moment Nia pulled out Ethan's card, her entire demeanor changed. "Mr. Reynolds is expecting you," she said, suddenly all smiles, suddenly treating them like they mattered. "Take the elevators to the top floor." Nia exchanged a look with her mother before they followed the sleek silver signs toward the elevators. Top floor. Of course, the ride up was silent, the kind of silence that held everything Nia wasn't saying. She could feel her mother's nerves beside her, but neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. When the doors finally slid open, Ethan Reynolds was already waiting. He stood near a massive glass window that overlooked the city, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a phone he tucked away the second he saw them. He looked different in the daylight, less like the powerful man who had stepped in the day before, more like someone who had already made up his mind about something. "Mrs. Carter," he greeted first, extending a hand toward Lorraine. She hesitated, just for a second, before shaking it. "And Nia," he said next, his eyes flicking to her. "I'm glad you came." Nia didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. Ethan gestured toward the seating area near his desk, and they followed, sinking into leather chairs that felt too soft, too foreign. "I won't waste your time," he said, taking a seat across from them. "You asked for a job for your mother." Nia sat up straighter, her hands clasped together in her lap. This was it, the moment that could change everything. Ethan studied them for a long moment. Then, he nodded. "I'm offering you a full-time position here at Reynolds Enterprises," he said, looking directly at Lorraine now. "Stable hours, benefits, health insurance. It's yours if you want it." Lorraine's breath caught, and for the first time Nia saw her mother at a loss for words. A full-time job, with benefits, a salary that could actually pay their bills. This wasn't just a job. It was security. It was a future. I don't know what to say," Lorraine finally breathed, her voice unsteady. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Say yes." Nia couldn't breathe. Her mother's fingers curled against her skirt, her expression tight with emotion. Finally, she looked at Ethan, then at Nia. Then, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan smiled, a small, knowing smile. But then he turned to Nia. "And for you," he said. Nia's stomach flipped. "I didn't ask for anything for me," she said quickly, almost like she had to remind him. "I know," Ethan said. "That's why I'm offering." She froze. "You have a good head on your shoulders, Nia," he continued, "and a fire most people your age don't have. I'd be a fool to ignore that." He reached into his desk, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table toward her. "I'm offering you a scholarship," he said. "Full tuition. A spot at Riverside Academy, if you want it." Nia's breath caught in her throat. A scholarship. Riverside Academy wasn't just any school. It was the best school in the city. The kind of place that only rich kids attended. The kind of place that opened doors people like her never even got to knock on. She stared at the folder like it might disappear if she touched it. This was it. The thing she had never dared to dream about. And yet, her fingers tightened on the edge of her chair. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Ethan chuckled, but not in a mocking way. "No catch," he said. "You work hard, you prove you belong there, and you take this opportunity for what it is." She glanced at her mother. Lorraine's eyes were wet, but her expression held something fierce, something proud. This wasn't just for her. It was for them. For every night they had spent worrying. For every morning her mother had gotten up before the sun. For every time they had been told, "No, this wasn't for people like you." Nia swallowed hard. Then, finally, she reached out and took the folder. She was ready. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.